Thank you all for your support. If you enjoy this podcast summary, please consider subscribing. Dr. John Delony joined Chris Williamson to discuss why people often date individuals who need fixing.
Delony shared that he aims to provide a safe space for people to open up, and his goal is to be the Hurman of mental health and relationships. The conversation turned to the topic of holding space for someone going through a difficult time. Delony emphasized the importance of not trying to offer solutions or answers, but rather just being there for the person. He noted that in our culture, we often prioritize talking and offering advice over simply being present. Delony shared a personal story about his wife's miscarriages and how he learned to be present for her in those moments. He praised Theo Vaughn for being a good space holder and for knowing when to just sit with someone in silence. The conversation then turned to the topic of how to help someone who's going through a tough time. Delony emphasized the importance of showing up and being present, rather than just offering words of encouragement.
Chris Williamson shared a personal story about a surprise birthday celebration that his team threw for him, and how it made him feel seen and loved.
Delony noted that this is a common experience, and that people often feel like they need to earn love and affection, rather than just receiving it. He noted that people need to have a sense of community and connection in order to thrive. The conversation then turned to the topic of self-love and self-acceptance.
Chris Williamson shared a story about James, who did a load of mushrooms and had a profound realization about whether people love him for who he is or for what he does.
Delony noted that this is a common question, and that people often struggle with feeling loved and accepted for who they are. Delony shared a personal story about growing up in a house with financial tension and how this affected his relationship with money. He noted that he and his wife have had to learn to navigate a new world of abundance, and that this has been a challenge.
Delony's insights and personal stories added a richness and depth to the conversation, and Chris's questions and reflections helped to bring out the key points. The conversation turned to the topic of men's mental health and the desire for self-love and high performance. Chris Williamson read an essay he had written on the topic, which emphasized the importance of men feeling loved and accepted for who they are, not just for what they do.
Delony agreed that this was a powerful message and noted that it was similar to what his wife had said to him. The conversation also touched on the topic of social media and the way it can create a culture of outrage and criticism. Delony noted that people often make character assassinations based on small mistakes or missteps, rather than giving others the benefit of the doubt.
Chris Williamson agreed that this was a problem and noted that it was often driven by a desire to feel superior to others. The conversation turned to the topic of why people often get into relationships with partners that they feel like they need to fix.
Delony noted that this was often a result of unfinished business from childhood, where people try to solve the problems of their past by repeating them in their relationships.
Chris Williamson agreed that this was a common pattern and noted that it was often driven by a desire to fill a void or cope with difficult emotions.
Delony shared a personal anecdote about watching a documentary on Michael Jordan, where Jordan says, "You don't want this life." Delony reflected on how Jordan's words made him realize that the pursuit of greatness can be hollow and unfulfilling. The conversation shifted to the topic of dating people who need fixing.
Williamson noted that there's an allure to someone who doesn't love us back, and Delony suggested that this allure is rooted in our desire to solve problems and prove our worth. They discussed how this desire can lead us to seek out relationships that are toxic or unfulfilling, and how it's often a reflection of our own self-worth.
Delony shared a quote from Louise Perry's book, which suggests that we've solved so many existential issues that we're now bored to death.
Williamson noted that this boredom can lead us to seek out new challenges and problems to solve, even if they're not necessarily meaningful or fulfilling. The conversation turned to the topic of self-actualization and Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Delony suggested that the idea of self-actualization is often misunderstood, and that it's not a destination, but rather a process of growth and development.
Williamson noted that self-actualization is often tied to our sense of purpose and meaning, and that it's not something that can be achieved through external means, but rather through a deep sense of connection and fulfillment.
Delony shared his thoughts on the importance of community and shared experiences in achieving self-actualization. He noted that having people to share successes with is a key part of what makes life fulfilling, and that solo entrepreneurship or working remotely can often lead to feelings of isolation and disconnection.
Williamson shared his own experiences with touring and performing, and how it's often the shared experiences with others that make it fulfilling. The conversation also touched on the idea that people often stay in relationships because they're afraid of being alone or uncertain about what the future holds.
Delony suggested that people should focus on building a sense of self-worth and self-love, rather than relying on others to fulfill their needs.
Chris Williamson asked Dr. Delony about how to motivate someone who knows they need to leave a relationship, but is struggling to find the courage to do so.
Delony suggested that people should focus on building a sense of agency and self-awareness, and that they should surround themselves with people who support and encourage them. He also emphasized the importance of taking small steps towards change, rather than trying to make drastic changes all at once. The conversation also touched on the idea that people often prioritize security and stability over novelty and exploration in their relationships. Delony suggested that people should strive for a balance between the two, and that they should be willing to take risks and try new things in order to build a more fulfilling relationship. Delony shared a personal anecdote about a time when he had to lean into a difficult conversation with his daughter, rather than pulling away. He emphasized the importance of being present and engaged in relationships, even when it's challenging, and suggested that this is a key part of building strong and healthy relationships. They offered practical advice and personal anecdotes, and emphasized the importance of building self-awareness, self-love, and a sense of agency in order to create more fulfilling and healthy relationships. They explored the idea that people's desires can define the path of least resistance in their lives, even if it's difficult or painful. The conversation touched on the importance of acknowledging and honoring one's emotions, rather than trying to suppress or solve them.
Chris shared his own experiences with trying to tap into his emotions and become more embodied, citing his upcoming retreat with Joe Hudson. He also discussed the concept of what you want to want, and how it can help people align their desires with their values.
Dr. John Delony emphasized the importance of grief and allowing oneself to feel sad after a breakup. He noted that our culture has an allergy to grief, and that people often try to suppress or solve their emotions rather than sitting with them. And while you're sitting with them, the conversation also touched on the idea that the brain's circuitry for grief is the same as for death. But the problem is that the person is still alive and can be in touch with them. Delony suggested that having a witness to one's grief can be helpful, and that people should give themselves permission to feel sad.
Chris and Dr. John Delony also discussed the challenges of doing inner work and introspection, and how it can lead to uncovering difficult emotions and memories. They touched on the idea that our bodies can create stories to cope with difficult experiences, and how technology can sometimes hinder our ability to process and move on from these experiences. The conversation is a thought-provoking exploration of the complexities of human emotions and relationships, and offers practical advice for navigating difficult experiences and emotions. They discuss the concept of the psychological immune system, which protects us from painful memories by allowing us to laugh at them over time. However, this process can be hindered when memories remain stuck in short-term memory, causing ongoing emotional distress. Chris Williamson shares his experience with psychoanalysis, which opened up a Pandora's box of unresolved issues. He notes that memories can be moved from short-term to long-term memory, but sometimes they get stuck in both, leading to ongoing emotional pain.
The conversation turns to the topic of journaling, with Dr. John Delony sharing his main learning from video. The discussion revolves around the idea that people often seek out relationships that are familiar, even if they're not healthy, due to unfinished business from childhood. Dr. Delony emphasizes the importance of building self-awareness, self-love, and a sense of agency to create more fulfilling relationships. He also notes that people often prioritize security and stability over novelty and exploration, and that a balance between the two is necessary for a healthy relationship. The conversation touches on the importance of acknowledging and honoring one's emotions, rather than trying to suppress or solve them. Dr. Delony suggests that people should focus on building a sense of self-worth and self-love, rather than relying on others to fulfill their needs. The discussion also explores the concept of the psychological immune system and the importance of self-awareness and emotional intelligence, particularly for men. Overall, the conversation offers practical advice and personal anecdotes on how to navigate difficult experiences and emotions, and how to create more fulfilling relationships. Key takeaways include the importance of self-awareness, self-love, and a sense of agency, as well as the need to acknowledge and honor one's emotions. By prioritizing these aspects, individuals can create more fulfilling relationships and improve their overall well-being. If you are interested to listen to complete 16-minute summary and unlock detailed insights for each topic discussed in the video, Check out quick podcast summaries on Spotify and Apple Podcasts with free trial. And later, just for the price of candy. Happy listening.